Missing time, materialisations and threats, these are all part of the sinister Men in Black phenomenon reported by witnesses of unidentified flying objects or UFOs for 80 years or more. Although these encounters continue to this day, here we look at some of the earliest cases last century. Missing time mystery. One evening in November 1961, Air Force office worker Paul Miller and 3 companions were driving home to Minot, North Dakota after a hunting trip. They spotted a 50-foot-long cylinder hovering in a field that they later described as a luminous silo. The cylinder glowed with a whitish-green light, abruptly vanished, then later reappeared when 2 humanoid figures were seen descending from its underside. Miller panicked, grabbed his weapon and wounded one of the beings. All the hunters immediately fled, but on their journey back to Minot experienced a strange blackout and lost 3 hours. The terrified men decided not to report the incident to anyone, but the next morning, when Miller started work in his office, 3 men arrived at his workplace. The black-clad men claimed to be government officials, although they showed no credentials, and snidely remarked that they hoped Miller was telling the truth about the UFO. When asked how they knew about it, they said vaguely that they had had a report, and Miller said, seemed to know everything about him. They questioned Miller in private and then took him to his home to examine the clothes he had been wearing on the hunting trip. One of them repeatedly checking the soles of the shoes he had worn. After searching his house for an hour, they suddenly left, and Miller's Air Force employers later said that they had no idea of the men's identities. Miller was too scared and intimidated to dare tell his story for several years. Sinister threat. In July 1967, Robert Richardson of Toledo, Ohio, reported to the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, that he had collided with a strange circular object while driving at night. He had been coming round a bend when confronted by an unearthly craft which was blocking the road. Unable to stop in time, he had accidentally rammed the object, although not very hard. He reported that seconds after the impact of the collision, the UFO somehow faded away and vanished. Richardson had told the police about the collision, who, when they accompanied him to the scene, could find evidence of only his own car's skid marks. However, he returned to the crash scene the next day and managed to find a small, irregular-shaped lump of metal, which looked as if it might have come from the UFO. After informing APRO of the incident, he took the strange piece of metal to them for analysis. It was 3 days later, at 11 p.m, when 2 men in their late 20s visited Richardson at his home and asked him a string of questions about his UFO encounter over about 10 minutes. The men did not identify themselves, and Richardson felt peculiar and strangely reluctant to ask who they were. He said that the men were pleasant and, after finishing their questioning, left in a black 1953 Cadillac. The car's registration number, when later checked, was found to have never been issued in the United States. 1 week later, 2 different men knocked at Richardson's door, having arrived in a current model Dodge. The men wore black suits and were described as dark-complexioned. One spoke perfect English, while the second had an indeterminable accent, with Richardson feeling that both seemed vaguely foreign. At first, they were trying to persuade him that he had imagined the UFO, but then directly demanded that he hand over the piece of metal. When he told them it had gone to APRO for analysis, they outright threatened him, saying, "If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, then you'd better get the metal back." The existence of the metal was known only to Richardson, his wife, and 2 senior APRO members. There was no obvious connection between the 2 pairs of visitors, apart from access to information that was not freely or publicly available. The APRO analysis showed unusually pure proportions of magnesium and iron, and after they returned the metal lump to Richardson, he awaited another visit from the men in black to claim it, but they never returned. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Materialized beings. In 1952, Albert Bender of Bridgeport, Connecticut, founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau to investigate the phenomenon of UFOs, publishing a magazine called Space Review. As the first major civilian UFO club in the world, the group quickly gained 1,000 members worldwide. After an intensive year of researching UFO occurrences, Bender announced that he had discovered the solution or answer to people's questions. However, strangely, he almost immediately shut the Bureau down with the cryptic explanation that, while he had solved the mystery, he could not reveal the answer, quote, by orders from a higher source. After a 9-year silence, Bender disclosed that, having just completed an article about his findings for the October issue of the Space Review, he had suffered a sudden dizzy spell and gone to lie down. He was terrified to see 3 black silhouettes materializing in his bedroom, the shadows then solidifying to show 3 figures floating about a foot off the floor. He observed that they were 3 men dressed in black, their faces partly shaded by Homburg-style hats. He described the eyes of the men suddenly lighting up like flashlight bulbs, seeming to burn into his soul, causing unbearable pain above his eyes as he felt them probing his mind. One, who was holding the typescript of his article, told him that his speculation about UFOs was correct. Bender experienced a powerful voice in his head forbidding him to tell anyone the truth, that this was his duty as an American citizen. The voice maintained that they had a special assignment, quote, down here, and were not to be disturbed. Then followed a thinly veiled threat. We are among you and know your every move. Moments later, the terrifying entities had vanished. Following their visit, Bender did not eat for 3 days and suffered from frequent headaches, dizziness and memory loss, while his co-workers described him as scared. He pulled his revelatory article from publication and refrained from speaking of his experience. The men in black had seemingly silenced him through intimidation and possibly some kind of psychic attack. Eerie warning. Although visits from men in black have been described in some form or other over centuries, their emergence in recent times can be traced back to a specific date, June 27, 1947. Harold Dahl was steering his patrol boat while undertaking a conservation project gathering logs near Washington's Maury Island, when he claimed to have witnessed 6 donut-shaped objects hovering over his boat. One of the aerial craft appeared to be malfunctioning and released a spray of metallic debris which pelted downwards and fell onto the boat. This onslaught broke the arm of Dahl's 15-year-old son who was on board and killed their dog. Dahl photographed the UFOs before they disappeared. His superior officer, Fred Chrisman, had promptly investigated the incident and reported having witnessed an unusual craft and also recovered debris from Maury Island. On the following morning, a man in a black suit was to appear at Dahl's door and invite him to breakfast at a local diner. During their conversation, the stranger recounted in great detail Dahl's previous day's encounter, although he had told virtually no one about the incident. The man seemed to be issuing a warning, saying that he knew a great deal more about Dahl's experience than he would want to believe. Before they parted, he advised Dahl not to speak to anyone about what he had witnessed or bad things would happen. Even more concerning, 1 month later, 2 Army A2 intelligence officers were tasked to investigate the incident. After their visit, they were leaving in their B-25 Mitchell when the plane caught fire and crashed. Both men perished, a fate that over time seemed to become a pattern after Men in Black warnings. Dahl was so intimidated by his visit from the stranger that he initially claimed his UFO sighting was a hoax. Years later, however, he retracted his denial, maintaining that both his original encounter and the threatening contact from the man in black had indeed occurred. The term Men in Black seemed to have been coined from this early incident.